Hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and today we are continuing with my DC Rebirth reading guide. Yes, I've read the entirety of DC Rebirth, which is over 2,500 single issues, and I'm using that to make this guide for you. As a quick introduction and explanation, for the DC Rebirth reading guide as a whole, I've split it into these various sections, which you can see here. So you've got the 7 sections that comprise DC Rebirth as a whole, in other words, everything that was published during the DC Rebirth era. And over the last few weeks, last few months, I've covered all the other bullet points other than the top one, which we're calling Core Rebirth Universe. And the last video I dropped was the introduction to the Core Rebirth Universe reading guide. As a result, that was the introduction. I would strongly recommend that you check that video out. It covers all the basic principles like what's included, what's excluded, what the date parameters of Rebirth are, concepts like type P and J readers, and also what volumes with a big and small V are, which is all going to be very important for what we're talking about. So my assumption is that you watch that video, that you're familiar with all those concepts, and so now we are diving into that Core Rebirth universe, the top bullet point in the initial breakdown of 7. And the top bullet point breaks down to these 10, of which today we're looking at part 1. That's why this is video 1.1. We're going to be talking about New 52 Epilogue series. The reason we're doing that is that if you look at the New 52 as a whole, it actually has 14 different sections in my New 52 series. As you can see, I have a series here. I have my reading guide, 31 videos, 14 sections, and so on and so forth. But the important thing to keep in mind is that whilst that video series covers the entirety of the New 52, there are still some series best described as stragglers from the New 52 era of comics. Now, as the DC Rebirth is so clearly the next era, like a sequel era of sorts to the New 52 universe, it's important to mop up the stragglers to avoid confusion, especially given that the following series, most of the ones we're going to talk about, are actually branded DC Rebirth, but do not fit into the other neat subdivisions we're looking at later. Instead, these can be considered simple, optional epilogues for fans of those series from the New 52 era who, like me, may have read the entirety of the New 52. However, they fit much more into the New 52 despite their DC Rebirth branding and publication dates. This is the DC New 52 map, and what we're going to do is talk about the area of the map related to the series that we're going to be talking about as an epilogue. And this is the New 52 map that I've used for the entirety of that previous series. What we're going to do is we are going to zoom in, because here in the Batman section, if you follow Batman all the way through, and obviously we've got Endgame, we've got Super Heavy, we've got Bloom, all the way to Batman Epilogue, the end of the Snyder era and Snyder and Capullo era on Batman. When Batman starts in DC Rebirth, it has a different writer, it has a different artist. However, if you are still a fan of Snyder and Capullo and you are missing their Batman, then what I would recommend you do is you check out DC Universe Rebirth All-Star Batman. Now, this was released from 2016 to 2017. It's a spiritual sequel, as I said, to the Batman series from the New 52. It's written by Scott Snyder, but instead of having art from Capullo, it's got art from rotating cast of artists. So people like Jock, for example, who are amazing artists with very unique styles. The first volume is called My Worst Enemy. It's the cover you can see here. It contains issues 1 to 5. The second volume is basically a sequel to that, and this is the cover over here. It contains issues 6 to 9. So volume 1 and volume 2 are basically 2 parts of the same story. Volume 3 has got this cover and is called The First Ally. It contains issues 10 to 14, and that is the whole of All-Star Batman as a series. A couple of things worth noting here. Firstly, issues 1 to 4 and issue 69 all have a backup story in them called The Cursed Wheel, and all those different parts of The Cursed Wheel are collected and reprinted in a separate collection, which we're going to be talking about in videos 5.1, 5.2 and so on. So we're not going to cover that now, but they are in the single issues here if you pick up All-Star Batman as singles. Something to note is that the All-Star Batman imprint is not related to the All-Star imprint that was popularized by All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison back in 2006, or by All-Star Batman and Robin by Frank Miller from 2005. This is completely different. The use of the All-Star label is just completely unrelated to previous All-Star comics. If, for example, you read all of All-Star Batman, issues 1 to 14, those 3 trades, and you're still desperate for a bit more Snyder and Capullo, or that you've missed Capullo's artwork, I would recommend this. Now, this is a Black Label book, but I don't cover it in the Black Label video overview that I've done, because it fits in here much better. This came out from 2019 to 2020, so it's unequivocally a Black Label book, but given it's written by Snyder with art from Capullo, it feels very much like a kind of capstone or sort of finale or ending to their New 52 Batman run. It's only 3 single issues. It's available as a hardcover. It's kind of deluxe or prestige format, which basically means kind of magazine size. And so if you are a big fan of the Snyder Batman run, that's what you need to read. You need to read All-Star Batman, Volume 2 of All-Star Batman called Ends of the Earth, Volume 3, which is called First Ally, and then Batman Last Night on Earth. The next series to talk about in the New 52 is actually, if we zoom in here to the Lantern section, it's the bit of the New 52 which is right here. It is Blue Beetle. So Blue Beetle has a couple of volumes here in the New 52 and then kind of sort of disappears off the radar. In terms of that, Blue Beetle then continues on in the Rebirth era, and it continues with this. This is the Blue Beetle series that was published from 2016 to 2018. And while it's not a direct sequel to any New 52 series, not even directly the last issue of Blue Beetle during the New 52, it does clearly move on from that era and just follow on from it. And in fact, issue 12 shows that the series is actually a sequel to Justice League 3001. Now I'm going to go back here and I'm going to show you where Justice League 3001 is. There's this whole section of my New 52 map, which is all kind of weird, goofy stories. And here you'll see Justice League 3000. And if we follow that line up, here we see Justice League 3001, which are not Justice League stories. They're just goofy, kind of weird, out of continuity stories. And in this case, Blue Beetle in DC Rebirth kind of follows on from Blue Beetle in New 52, but also from Justice League 3001 from New 52. Going back to the trades, we've got the first volume here, which is called The More Things Change. This contains the Rebirth one-shot and issues 1 to 5. If you're not sure what I mean by Rebirth one-shot, we're going to talk about that in the next video, which is video 2.1 of this series. Next, we have Blue Beetle Volume 2, which is called Hard Choices. This contains issues 6 to 12. Issues 8 features both OMAC and Brother Eye, so it kind of ties into some slightly wider stuff there as well. Volume 3 is called Road to Nowhere. It contains issues 13 to 18. Issue 13 is thankfully the end of the Giffen era, and from that point on, Christopher Sabella takes over, and the story, which is quite uneven up until that point, kind of evens out and becomes better. But that said, this is the final trade paperback collection for Blue Beetle in the DC Rebirth era. I'm aware all of these have had DC Rebirth branding, but they are not part of DC Rebirth. Remember, this is an epilogue to New 52. What I'm showing you now is my reading map for the Elseworlds twist of my New 52 reading guide. In other words, when we got to the 7th section of my New 52 reading guide, I actually unveiled a second map, which is this one, like a map within a map, which clustered all the series of the New 52 that were actually all in a single discrete separate reality to the main New 52 continuity. That parallel universe was the Earth 2 universe and contained quite a few series. So, for example, it contained, if you look here, the mega event Future's End. That was contained as this. And it also contained the event Convergence and all the spin-offs that came off from Convergence. So it's worth noting that right at the top of this, you've got the Earth 2 series. This is the main Earth 2 series you can see here. And then it goes into those various events we talked about, Future's End and Convergence and so on. But after Convergence, we then see the start of publication of a new Earth 2 series here, which you can see is called Earth 2 Society. There we are, sorry for zooming out there. And Earth 2 Society admittedly started publication during the New 52, but actually continued well on into the second year of DC Rebirth publication before eventually ending. However, it never intersected with the DC Rebirth universe in any way. It was never Black Label and wasn't so much out of continuity as it was a series that was finishing the story of its own continuity. So let's have a look at the trades. This is the first trade, Volume 1, Planetfall. It collects DC's Sneak Peek Earth 2 Society and then issues 1 to 7. Now, DC's Sneak Peek is something that happened after Convergence during the New 52 era. You can watch those videos and I'll explain it in more detail there. So include that sneak peek and then issues 1 to 7. Volume 2 is called Indivisible and collects issues 8 to 12. Whilst the previous volume was written by Daniel Wilson with art from Jorge Jimenez, this volume is when Dan Abnett takes over writing. The third volume of Earth 2 Society is just called A Whole New World, and it collects issues 13 to 15, then Annual 1, then issue 16. Again, note the complete lack of DC Rebirth branding here. This is its own thing following on from New 52. And finally, the series ends with Trade Paperback Collection 4, or volume with a small v4. It's called Life After Death, and it collects issues 17 to 22. Back to the New 52 map. The next thing that we're going to have a look at is actually on the New 52 map, because it's all the way up here, and it is Gotham Academy second semester here, right here on the fringe. In retrospect, perhaps I shouldn't have included this in the New 52 guide, but either way, we're going to talk about it now. Now, as you can see, it's a sequel. So those two volumes there are a sequel to the rest of the Gotham Academy series from the New 52 era. If we look at the actual trade collections themselves, they're still written by Becky Cloonan and Brendan Fletcher, and exactly like the preceding volume of the New 52. And it was published from 2016 to 2017. Volume 1, you can see here, is just called Welcome Back. It contains issues 1 to 3 and 5 to 8. And then the second trade collection, which finishes out second semester, is called The Ballad of Olive Silverlock and contains issues 4 and then issues 9 to 12. Now, don't forget that if you're still after even more Gotham Academy, the Licensed World section of this reading guide about DC Rebirth does talk about the Gotham Academy Lumberjanes crossover with Boom Studios. And there is a new Gotham Academy series being published in DC now in 2026, but I think it's going to be quite a while before my reading guides get to that. Back to the Rebirth map. The next thing that I want to do is to talk about something that happens in the New Storm, which is kind of the sequel to the Wildstorm universe, or rather the New 52 version of the Wildstorm universe. You'll see here we have the Midnighter series, which is absolutely New 52. And then after the Midnighter series, all the way up here, we've got Midnighter and Apollo, which was published in 2016 to 2017. Now, in retrospect, I really should have drawn a direct line between this yellow circle and these yellow circles, because these are all connected. Midnighter and Apollo is a direct sequel to the New 52 Midnighter series. As such, like I say, this is technically part of the Wildstorm universe. Obviously, like I just said, Wildstorm had merged into the New 52 at this point. As such, is not part of that rebooted line and is not part of the main continuity of DC Rebirth, because that's going to get rebooted during DC Rebirth. And I've done a video on that in this reading order called The Wildstorm. So what this series that you're looking at now is, it is a textbook example of a New 52 epilogue. So the trade paperback is just called Midnighter and Apollo. It collects the 6-issue miniseries. It's written by Steve Orlando with art from Fernando Bianco. Apollo and Midnighter's adventures actually continue on from this series by leapfrogging over DC Rebirth and the whole Warren Ellis Wildstorm reboot, and actually appearing during the Infinite Frontier era with Superman and the Authority, and then it kind of continues on from then. But I'm not going to be covering that in this DC Rebirth order because it is post DC Rebirth. Back to the Rebirth, the New 52 map. And down here, you've got the Superman section. And right at the end of the Superman section, you've got the end of, the final days of Superman, the end of the Superman series, Action Comics, Wonder Woman, Superman, and so on. Well, literally after these events here, which are all part of the crossover event, Final Days of Superman, we then have this spin-off title coming out of it. Now, again, not a direct sequel to a preceding New Superman title, but this series was published from 2016 to 2018, and it exists purely as a result of the event Final Days of Superman, which is a story arc that had cut across all the super family of comics in the final months of the New 52. The protagonist, who you can see here on the cover, is called Kong Keenan, and doesn't really feature in DC Rebirth, barring a few very token cameos. So this series is written by Jean Luen Yang, and illustrated by Victor Bogdanovich and Billy Tan. And the first volume you can see here, this is volume with a small v, obviously. This is a trade paperback called Made in China. It contains issues 1 to 6. This is the second trade paperback, which is called Coming to America, and contains issues 7 to 12. If you've been reading Superman, or you're interested in the Superman section, which is going to be videos 8.1, 8.2, and so on of this series, then this story arc here, Coming to America, occurs after the Superman Reborn event. In fact, if you have these in single issues, issue 10 actually has a little bit of branding on the cover saying Superman Reborn Aftermath. That's just so you know, in case you're reading this kind of parallel to the Superman section of DC Rebirth, which you absolutely do not have to. The next trade paperback is called Equilibrium, contains issues 13 to 19. Issue 19 is technically the last issue of this series, New Superman, and that's because the next issue 20, is rebranded and actually called New Superman and the Justice League of China. That's the actual branding on the front cover of the single issue. So this is volume 4, volume with a small v. Even though the issue names have changed, the numbering hasn't. So this now contains issues 20 to 24. Next, what I want to talk about is something that's not actually linked to the New 52 map at all. It's actually this particular issue, which is a Catwoman one-shot called Catwoman Election Night from 2017. Now, it's in 2017, so you're wondering why on earth have I even mentioned this? This is pure DC Rebirth, surely. Well, sort of. This single issue with this cover contains 2 vignettes. The first one is a thinly disguised satire to the 2016 election. The second is an epilogue to an excellent series called Prez that was published during the New 52. Now, Prez is something I covered in my kind of out of continuity section for the New 52, which was section 13 of that video series. And in that, I talked about Prez as a 6-issue series that was collected in a trade paperback called Corn Dog in Chief. You can see that here. This is New 52. You can tell from the DC Comic logo in the corner, that is the New 52 branding. However, in 2024, it was published again in a trade paperback that looks like this. It's called Setting a Dangerous Precedent, or President rather. It collects the 2015 series from the New 52, but also it collects the vignette from this particular one-shot, Catwoman Election Night, as well as a brand new issue called Prez the Final Frontier. So this was definitely printed during DC Rebirth, but is absolutely a sequel to the New 52 Prez series. In fact, largely it's a reprint of that series. Technically, this is also printed under the DC Graphic Novels for Young Adults imprint, which I've previously said are things that I'm going to exclude from my DC Rebirth reading order. But as you can see, Prez kind of straddles the line in a lot of ways. Is it New 52? Is it a DC Young Adults? Is it Rebirth? Is it a reprint? It's a bit of a funny one, so I just mention it here. As you can tell, we're going in alphabetical order. So next, back to the New 52 map, we are going to be looking at the Six Pack and Dog Welder series, which I know sounds really strange. So the reason for that is, if we zoom in here, on the goofy section of my map, there's this series here by Garth Ennis called All-Star Section 8. This is a New 52 series, but there's a direct sequel to it that released in 2016 and 2017 under DC Rebirth, which is this, also written by Garth Ennis. It's got art from Russell Braun. It's called Six Pack and Dog Welder Hard Traveling Heroes, which is a bit of a play on the Green Lantern, Green Arrow name for that dynamic. And it's not on the New 52 map, but is absolutely a continuation of the New 52 series All-Star Section 8. And then this doesn't have any more series after this. This is the last one. Just in case you're wondering who and what this character is, if you really want to understand who and what that character is, you do need to read a fair bit more Garth Ennis, just to kind of understand what he's done, especially in the Hitman series, where these characters are also mentioned as well. But that's all pre-New 52 and absolutely not obligatory. Back to the New 52 map, what I want to look at now is over on the Justice League section. Over on the Justice League section, down here, we've got Suicide Squad. And then we also have these Suicide Squad Most Wanted stories, which is fine. And they're collected as various trade paperbacks. And I think I actually have the Deadshot one because it's excellent. But you've got a Katana one. You've got one of, what's his name? El Diablo. And then you've got one of Amanda Waller. Well, the next thing we'll talk about is a sequel to this Suicide Squad Most Wanted series, and it is this, which is Suicide Squad Katana, The Revenge of Cobra. Now, when these were released as 6 single issues. But those issues are actually one of those anthology series where each issue is 46 pages long and contains 2 different story arcs. The A arc was about Katana and continued smoothly on from the Katana Suicide Squad Most Wanted trade paperback I just showed you from the New 52. It is a direct sequel to the Cult of the Cobra story in that trade paperback. Like that trade paperback is written by Mike Barr with art from Philippe Briones. If you have these in single issues, however, you'll see that the B arc, the secondary arc, is some random 6-issue thing about a Suicide Squad Black, like some kind of answer by Waller to the Justice League Dark. Like a mystical, magical Suicide Squad. It's pretty meh. It's written by Jai Nitz with art from Scott Eaton. So all the A stories related to Katana are collected here in the trade paperback you can see here as a direct sequel to the New 52 Suicide Squad Most Wanted Katana trade. However, all the B stories about Suicide Squad Black remain uncollected. And finally, or almost finally, back to the New 52. And again, down here we have, as I said, all the Superman stuff. And down here we have all the things for the final days of Superman, this event where various things happen. And I already mentioned that New Superman is a spin-off or a sequel from that. Well, so is this. This is DC Universe Rebirth Superwoman. Again, very clear Rebirth branding. Again, that's very much misleading. This is not part of DC Rebirth. This is purely part of New 52 as an epilogue series. Again, it exists purely as a result of the events of the final days of Superman, which is a story arc that, like I say, cuts across everything. And so in that sense, this is just like New Superman. It was written by Phil Jimenez with art from various artists, and then eventually Kate Perkins takes over writing duties. The first volume you can see here is called Who Killed Superwoman, a volume with a small v, obviously, and that contains issues 1 to 7. Volume with a small v 2 is called Rediscovery and contains issues 8 to 12. Both issues 8 and 9 are branded as saying they're Superman Reborn tie-ins, but that can safely be ignored. Again, I only mention that in case you're reading this on top of what I recommend in videos 8.1, 8.2, 8.3 and so on, while I'll be talking through Superman. I would not recommend reading this or New Superman as part of a read through of the super universe of DC Rebirth. But if you want to, you can. But as I say, in my mind, these are very much New 52 epilogues. Superwoman finishes with this, which is volume with a small v3. It's called The Midnight Hour. As you can see, Kate Perkins is now taking over writing. And this contains issues 13 to 18, and then the series ends. Last but not least, I just want to talk about Batman Beyond. Batman Beyond has, this is volume 1. volume with a small v, Escaping the Grave. It has this branding for DC Universe Rebirth. So clear as day, it looks like it's DC Rebirth. It is not DC Rebirth. Despite the branding, this isn't part of DC Rebirth at all. It's not even an epilogue to the New 52. This is literally part of the DC Beyond universe. So you got volume 1 here, volume 2, Rise of the Demon, volume 3. So 2 and 1 have strong Rebirth branding. Volume 3 loses it, volume 4 loses it. And when I say this is part of the DC Beyond universe, what I mean is this. This map here is for my DC Beyond map for DC, and this covers everything to do with not just Batman Beyond, as you can see here at the top, but then it goes into Superman Beyond, Justice League Beyond, Justice League Unlimited, I think it is. There's loads of other spin-offs in this universe. Then it has the New 52 stuff, which is this, Futures End, more Futures End. All this was in the New 52 as well, these 3 volumes here. Then we have DC Rebirth, and then after DC Rebirth, we then get into the Rebirth issues. But keep in mind, this is the DC Beyond reading order. You should not be reading this as part of DC Rebirth, despite, understandably, the misleading branding. This is volume with a small v5. 6 here, 7 here, and then the 8th and final one here with the eradication agenda. If you're wondering what on earth I'm talking about when I say it's got its own universe and so on, you want a bit more support or guidance, I got you covered. I have the Ultimate DC Beyond Reading Guide right here. It's a 3-part guide. It covers everything in the map, so it takes us up to and including the end of the Batman Beyond trade paperback collections that were published during the DC Rebirth era. There has been more Batman Beyond since, and I do plan on revisiting that and adding to the DC Beyond reading guide. But for now, this is where you need to go if you're curious about that. Okay, that's the end of this section. So literally section 1.1 of the DC core universe is this. And what we've covered today, believe it or not, is 132 issues, not including the 50 issues of Batman Beyond. So we've covered quite a lot, but these are all New 52 epilogues. I made this section specifically for those people that are keen on DC Rebirth, but view it as a sequel to New 52, which it very much is. But I just want you to know, if you're the sort of obsessive compulsive like me that has read every single issue of DC New 52, all 3,600 of them, then these are the epilogues to those stories that you know and love. As of next time, so the next video I drop in a few days' time, that's going to be video 2.1, and we are going to be looking at the DC Rebirth one-shot. With that in mind, with the DC Rebirth one-shot, what I would say is keep an open mind. It's going to be a little bit confusing. There's a lot of other kind of mentions of Rebirth one-shots, and I'll try to explain it through step by step. And the next section, section 2, is going to be video 2.1, the DC Rebirth one-shot, and then video 2.2, which is talking about, I hate to say it, the politics and the writers and the real-world dynamic about DC Rebirth, which is essential before we get onto section 3, which we'll get onto after that. As always, thanks for watching, and yeah, stay tuned for the little outro.
Alright, thanks for watching everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at @IamThomasJudge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.